Breaking Barriers, a podcast by the Phoenix Game.
GM Designs, welcome to Breaking Barriers, a podcast by the Phoenix Guild. The Phoenix Guild is a community focused towards increasing diversity and representation in the Web3 ecosystem. Here at Breaking Barriers, we invite KOLs and industry experts to share their journey and experience. So join us while we dive into what's happening in the industry. Today with us, we have Heather Swope, who's a Senior Solidity Engineer.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So let's dive into the conversation. Can you tell us a bit about your journey into Web3 and how did you first encounter it?
Sure. Well, I was already working as a software engineer because I worked as a software engineer for a long time. And I was actually listening to a podcast one day, and it wasn't even a technical podcast. It was a podcast that was being put on by one of the brokers that I was freelancing through, because in the Netherlands where I live, when you freelance, which I was doing at the time, you have to go through brokers. And they had a podcast, and they just happened to have one about a guy who had started a blockchain related consulting company in the Netherlands. And of course, I had heard of Bitcoin and I kind of knew what it was, but I wasn't really paying attention to it at that time. And this is in April of 2018, so right about 6 years ago. On this podcast, he was really talking about blockchain as a technology and what it was. And I thought, ooh, this is really fascinating. And I want to learn more about this. So I started doing more research just to find out more about blockchain. And I found it really interesting as a technology. It was really unlike any other technology I'd worked with. And I thought, I wanted to get into this. So, started looking into how can I even get into it? I didn't even know where to. So I contacting some people on LinkedIn that seemed to be involved in the space and asking them, like, how could I get into it as a developer? Like, what should I learn? And some people were saying, you should learn Solidity. Some people were saying you should learn Hyperledger Fabric. And at the time, I knew so little that I didn't even know really what those things were. So then I had to do some more research on that. And I decided I wanted to learn Solidity. And to be honest, the reason I chose Solidity instead of Hyperledger Fabric is because Solidity was very clear. It was, this one platform, Ethereum. It was a programming language, and I was a programmer, so I understood that. And there were so many different projects in Hyperledger that I didn't even know where to start, and Fabric was one of them. But I really picked Solidity kind of just as a default because it seemed like the easiest thing as a programmer that made the most sense. I didn't even realize at the time the platform or framework I was choosing would actually determine what kind of blockchain companies I worked for. And I could talk about that later. But I started out learning Solidity using crypto zombies. And I thought, this sounds really interesting, but I really wanted to learn Solidity better. And so I started researching different boot camps because I wanted one where there would be instructors who would actually be reviewing my code, telling me what I'm doing wrong. So after much research, I found the B9 Lab Academy, which was an online self-study program, but it did have instructors that would review code and a very intensive certification and exam process. So it took me about 18 months to finish that course and do the certification. But I got the certification in the beginning of October 2020, and then I got my first contract it was a short-term 3-month contract as a Solidity developer at the beginning of November of 2020.
Amazing. It's amazing how you mentioned having to choose between Solidity and Hyperledger Fabric, because I was at a similar stage during the start of my career, and I went with Fabric first because there were a lot of research opportunities around it. So I picked Hyperledger Fabric. But it's just amazing to hear how different journeys can have different trajectories, and there's so much to explore in this industry.
Yeah, and also that choice, as I said, and you probably realize this too, having worked with Hyperledger Fabric, that determines which direction you're going to go and what types of companies you're going to work for, which I didn't even know at the time. Totally clueless. And I picked Solidity. It was kind of like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Solidity looks like the easiest because the documentation, there's just one thing, and that's what I picked. But it was sort of, it was a somewhat informed decision, but it was also just, I got to pick something, so I go with that.
I think that's the beauty of the industry till date, that most of the decisions you are making, you are only 20 to 30% certain about them, and rest is just experimentation about it. Amazing. Okay, so what primarily sparked your interest about the blockchain technology, and what made you excited more about its future?
Well, the first thing, I mean, as someone who has always worked in IT, I know some people say this, but for me, it really is that I thought the technology was really interesting. And just this whole idea of database that spans organizations, spans the whole world, and that has, an audit trail basically that cannot be undone, I found really interesting. Because at the time, when I started getting interested in blockchain, I was working in integration. So I was an integration specialist, integrating not only systems within companies, but also systems of companies with external systems. And there are all kinds of things that you have to do, especially with external, when you're integrating one company's systems with external and data silos and trying to share data in sometimes very strange ways. And I thought, and this is actually more to the enterprise use case, but I thought, how could this database maybe be used integration or but I also like the fact that it was the openness of it, because I had worked in proprietary environments pretty much my whole career. I hadn't really worked in open source. So I also like this idea of the open, of the public blockchains, of things being open. And so for me, that was a very different thing, having come from working in proprietary systems for so long.
Amazing. Talking more about how you started with it, you mentioned you had no place to start with. So can you elaborate on what were like the major challenges while you were upskilling into Solidity that early?
At the time, I had kind of decided, because I was integration and I had specialized in the Oracle Fusion middleware integration platform, mostly because I used to work for BEA Systems, which had been bought by Oracle for their Java application server. And I'd been doing that for a long time. So it was just sort of, after a while, you want to do other things. And also I was seeing the work starting to dry up a little bit. So I could see that, okay, I need to get into something else. And already maybe a year or before, I'd been thinking, I want to get into something else so that I'm not reliant on this particular specific platform. And so I was looking at different things, because I had been doing Java. I had done Java for many years and hadn't been doing like hardcore Java as much since I'd been working with the Oracle Fusion middleware, but I had been a Java developer for a while. And I thought of maybe just going back to my Java roots and being a Java developer. And then right about that time is when I heard this podcast and I was like, ooh, this is really interesting. And I think that this could really be something in the future. So it was really, I was looking for something new, or maybe even to go back to, like I said, to something old for me, which was Java, but to be doing something else. And then this really interesting technology came along, like for me, for the first time. And I thought, oh, I want to do that because I think there's a future in it.
Amazing. And moving forward to today, where do you think Web3 tech is going to evolve in 2024, 25, now that AI is becoming an even big tech to be talked about?
Yeah, I think that there has been a lot of talk last year or 18 months or so about AI. And but I think that the blockchain technology is still here to stay, and it could even play a role with AI. For one thing, there are companies that are working on using AI to do smart contract audit. There are also ways. I mean, when it comes to AI, there's a lot of data that gets produced. There's a lot of media that gets produced, and it's not always real. Sometimes it's fake, or you don't know where it came from. So there could be a role in blockchain in actually showing the provenance of data and media, so that you could prove that it wasn't created by AI, that it is real. Or there could be a way to somehow take the data that is being fed into these large language models and to prove that data is valid by showing where it came from. Like, where did these models get the data that they're learning? And even use blockchain to show like a trail of that. So I think that there are different things that can be used to help us develop and also help us see where the data that is feeding the AI models. And I talked a little bit about using AI there are companies that are using it to build smart contract auditing. I also, the Copilot, it's GitHub Copilot a little bit. I don't think it's great all the time, but sometimes it can be handy. So that's another way that you can use AI as a tool. And as far as things that are going on in the Web3 world coming 2024, some things that I think that are really interesting are real world assets, or RWA for short. And a lot of people might ask, like, what's really interesting about real world assets? And some of the assets that are being tokenized are things like stocks and bonds. And if you can tokenize things like stocks and bonds, so in the real world, being able to borrow against stocks and bonds is called Lombard lending, and it's something right now that's only available to high net worth individuals or corporations. But if you could integrate stocks and bonds through these real world assets into lending and borrowing protocols like DeFi protocols, then that could make that option available to regular people like you and me. I also think that maybe DeFi will be starting to be combined more into traditional finance. I think that JP Morgan Chase is looking into things like that. I'm also interested in how NFTs can be used for more than just, for instance, giving benefits to holders of NFTs in certain platforms. And I think specifically to Ethereum, something that happened recently that's I think is really interesting is the EIP 4844 or proto dank sharding that went live with the Dencun upgrade that happened on March 13th is going to enable, well, it's intended anyway, to enable layer 2 rollups to be cheaper so that to bring down costs even more, because that's been an issue on the Ethereum blockchain for a long time. And after the Dencun upgrade went live on March 13th, I think even just a few days ago, there was actually an increase in blob fees, and that's because of something called blob subscriptions that just started a few days ago. But I think the prices have kind of gone back down again. So I think that those are some interesting things that are happening. And again, especially with the proto dank sharding, which is like a first step into sharding of Ethereum, which should make things bring down gas costs and also increase throughput. I think those are really interesting things that are going on right now.
Definitely, yeah. All of these are like trending topics. Definitely something to discuss during events. I hear them a lot, especially real world assets. So that's definitely something to look forward to in this. And coming back to something you mentioned that you felt that you needed to do something new. I think that's like a common feeling in developers, especially people who have been in their jobs for over 7 to 8 years. There's a constant feeling, what if we are outskilled by the younger folks? So as a developer, how do you keep up with the trends and how do you decide when to stay or when to change your tech stack?
Well, the one thing, staying up with the trends, that's, I like to follow, I'm not on Twitter because I'm not a huge fan of social media, but I am on LinkedIn. So there are some different things that I follow on LinkedIn just to see what's going on. For instance, you can follow, there's the Ethereum network, there's Ethereum Foundation and just Ethereum. And I also follow Polygon Labs. And there are also just some of my ex-colleagues that I've already worked with in Web3. I have them usually as contacts because they're my ex-colleagues, and they're usually interested in and doing interesting things with other companies. And so just watching, what they're doing is interesting. And also a few, women in blockchain communities. I do follow the Phoenix Guild and a few other ones. So for me, that's where I find things. And also from other colleagues, like when I'm working, we have a channel in Slack where people can post different things. And sometimes I post things and sometimes my colleagues do. So that's the way that I find out about.
Okay. And as a developer, how do you decide when you should hold on to a tech stack or it's like time to upskill?
It's interesting because for me, when I was freelancing, the way that seems to be kind of a key thing is when recruiters approaching you as often about certain types of work. So I started noticing that when I was doing because it was always pretty easy for me to find contracts when I was contracting as a integration specialist, but I started to see less often recruiters coming to me, and also the rates were starting to go down a little bit. So that was for me kind of a key to, maybe things are, maybe either the supply is too high or the demand is going down a little bit. So those are also ways to find out, like, what if you are accustomed to having recruiters approach you, and if they stop approaching you about certain things, that's usually that's starting to be kind of a key. If you see rates going down, that's a key. And also, watching what people are talking about, like I said, on LinkedIn, or if you're on Twitter, I know a lot of people, or X, whatever they're calling it these days, that people, if you just watch what people are talking about, people who are actually in technology, But if you do know recruiters that you keep in touch with, even just ask them, what are you seeing? What are companies coming to you for? What kinds of skills are they asking for?
That really makes sense, and had never thought of it that way. Thank you for
Right,
sharing.
because it's in their interest, the recruiters, to have to know people who do the things that their clients are asking them for, because then they place people, and that's how they make money. So
Definitely. Moving forward, as a senior solidity engineer, you work extensively with smart contracts. So, what are some key challenges that you face with smart contract development process, and how do you usually overcome that?
Well, the big thing that, of course, was different for me when I was starting to learn Solidity from other languages that I programmed, like JavaScript and Java, is that it really has to be, when you write Java code or JavaScript code, if it's not efficient, maybe the worst thing that happens is that the response time is too high. It's more than 2 to 3 seconds, or whatever the acceptable response time is. And when you're writing Solidity code, or any other code runs on any blockchain, smart contract code, if it's not efficient, it actually costs people money. So you have to be you have to be very aware. It needs to be efficient, not just because that's good coding practice and you want your code to be as efficient as possible, because that's usually what we strive for, but you're actually costing people money if it's not efficient, if it's not optimized. So that was also kind of a thing that I had to think about. And also the fact that, like I said, I had been coding Java before that for a while, where you don't have to really think as much about memory and where your variables are in memory. I mean, if you've coded something like C, then you have to be very aware of pointers and things like that. But it had been a while since I coded C, and more recently I'd been coding Java, where you don't have to think about the memory cleanup and things as much as you have to think really about where your variables are in Solidity. So that was like a different something that I had to kind of switch gears on. So I think that those are some things that you have to kind of switch your gears on if you've been used to coding things like Java and JavaScript, and you really have to code with optimization in mind. But I think that it's also recommended that after you've finished coding a project, to go back through and do an optimization round where you're specifically looking to see where can I optimize this code before you send it to audit. And you can use tools also like if you use Hard Hat, there's a gas reporter where it will run and it will show you for each function how much gas is used. So you can kind of play around with things too if you want to see. You want to change something and see, is it more or less gas efficient? And also another thing with Solidity that's different from other languages is that you have to really be careful about looping over dynamic arrays, for instance, because you could actually run out of gas. If dynamic array, you don't know how many elements are in that array. You don't know how many times it's going to loop. And that's, again, it's not just an issue with performance, but it's an issue that your function could actually stop working because there's not enough gas. And if you go over the block limit, the block gas limit, then you've really got a problem. So those are some things that are tricky. Another thing is smart contract size limit. So there's a size limit of like a little more than 25 or 24.5K. And because of that limit, that means you have to oftentimes break your smart contracts into different ones. And that can complexity, because then you've got smart contracts calling another smart contract. So you've got to make sure that if there are any functions that should be internal that you maybe had to make external because you've had to move them into another contract, you've got to make sure that those are protected, and that can cause some complexities. And then, of course, there's the fact that you can't patch code like you do when you program other programming languages. Again, if you were used to coding something like, and I'm mentioning Java and JavaScript because those are some of the languages I've programmed, but it goes for other languages like Python and C++ and I'm sure .NET things, that if you put code into production and a bug is found, or just you want to add a new feature, then you can patch that code. Well, with a smart contract, you can't really do that. And even with upgradable smart contracts, you're not actually patching the code, you're switching out the code that's being called by a proxy. So those are things that are tricky. So something that's really important, it's always important as a software engineer, is unit test, unit test, unit test, unit test, unit test, and unit test and unit test again. And always important in engineering, software engineering, but it's especially important when you are writing smart contracts, because again, you can't just patch them like you would with other languages.
Yeah, I think I can completely relate to this being working with smart contracts. I think that was primarily the biggest challenge ever because developers in habit could change syntaxes, could change the algorithms and structures, but were not used to a non-patchable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's scary. I mean, I think most software engineers, they do their best to make sure their code is fit for purpose. But no, and we have code reviews, other people looking at your code to do that, but nobody's infallible, and mistakes can happen. And the idea that you could put code out there that you can't ever change it's scary. It's intimidating.
So, with such a tech stack that is not very well defined, where problems every day can be new, that's something never anyone has never seen, and then the work culture being remote. How do you weigh problem solving skills with technical expertise?
Well, I think that for me, anyway, the whole remote working, I think, is actually quite fine because you get a chance to work with people from all over the place. Since I started working in blockchain, I have only worked remote. Before that, I was working locally in the Netherlands. I'm in Amsterdam, but I've worked in various places in the Netherlands. And you always, or generally speaking, work mostly Dutch people, which isn't a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with Dutch people. But then you've got everybody, and I myself am not Dutch, but so that's proof that not everyone that you're working with is Dutch. But people who are from the same place, they might tend to think a different way or the same way. And then if you're working remote, you can work with people from a lot of different countries, and then you get different people's experiences and also their maybe they think a little bit different. Some people even say your native language can affect the way you think. So if you've got people who speak different native languages, they might look at things differently. So I think that's a positive thing that companies can pull from resources from all over the world. And when it comes to problem solving, I think that for me, if I have like a question or something with my colleagues, then I just write them in Slack. I write them in Slack. Sometimes we'll jump on a Google Meet and we can discuss things. We can share screens. It is a little bit different from where you're sitting right across from someone or right next to someone. You can just turn to them and say, hey, what about this? But on the other hand, you can also, without being disturbed all the time. To be honest, when I was working on location, we'd spend a lot of time, shooting the breeze. And, it's not like we weren't working at all, but then there would be like, always on Monday, there's what'd you do this weekend? And, and those are nice things. You can to have those chats too. But, sometimes someone will start some conversation, then all of a sudden, like, you're spending 15 minutes talking about something, completely irrelevant to what you're supposed to be doing, or you're trying to work and your colleagues are talking around you. So I think that there are some good things about working remote is that you can have focus time. And then if you need to, then you can, send a message to a colleague and say, hey, can we do this? I fixed a bug that I found in some code a few days ago. And I sent a message to my colleague to say, hey, can you jump on a call with me? I want to check that this makes sense functionally. So we got on a call for 10 minutes. I showed him, this is what it was doing. This is what I changed it to. And he said, yeah, that makes sense. And he was one of the functional people. So that's like, we always have people, our colleagues doing code reviews, but this is one of the guys who was more of like the functional people. So I wanted to make sure that this made sense. Technically it made sense, but I thought it made sense functionally as well, but just wanted to check with him. So I jumped on a call. Yesterday, I jumped on a call with another colleague for 10 minutes. I think working remote can actually, you can still solve problems the same way you do when you sit next to somebody.
Yeah, and I think having your own setup or your own workspace definitely helps.
Yeah, and also it's nice. The job that I had before I started working in blockchain, I was commuting an hour and 10 minutes each way every day, which is also, it's not really nice.
Yeah, not an ideal situation ever.
Yeah.
Definitely. So for someone starting who's trying to learn and catch up onto code, what would you suggest is more important, like building onto their technical expertise first or building a problem-solving mindset?
I think that if we're assuming that this is someone who intends to go into the technical aspect of blockchain, I think that if you are going to be a software engineer of any type, you have to have problem-solving skills because you have to be able to think about, especially if you have to find bugs, you have to like really think about like, how do I go about debugging this? And then you also have to think about like, how do I take a functional spec and turn it into a technical spec, and then actually code it. So I think that to be any kind of software engineer, you have to have problem solving skills. So if we assume that somebody is already software engineering, then I think that those same problem solving that you have for whatever type of programming you're doing can be applied to programming in Web3. Again, there are other things you have to think about. Again, with all the the gas and where your variables are storage, are they in memory? Don't loop over dynamic arrays and things like that. Those are new things you have to think about. But the actual problem solving skills, I think that those same skills that would apply to software engineering anywhere can apply to software engineering in Web3. So if you're interested in getting into Web3 as a technical person, then I would say, start looking at actually building up the technical skills that are relevant.
So throughout your career, you've held like a lot of diverse roles. You've been a developer, you've been a team lead, scrum master, and an architect. So how has this experience helped you navigate through the industry and make like a career trajectory such as yours?
Well, I think that, again, some of that experience is general experience that can be applied over any kind of technical job. For instance, again, I have experience as a developer, as a technical team lead, scrum master, and architect. So I think that those roles still exist in Web3. You've got developer roles. You might have tech lead roles. A lot of teams do use Agile or a Scrum-like thing, so a Scrum-like methodology. So you can use those same techniques in Web3 development. And I think that for me personally, for instance, I think that if you are going to be a team lead of a team, you should have experience in that thing. For instance, if you're going to be the technical team lead of a smart contract development team, then you need to have experience as a smart contract developer. If you're going to be a team lead for architecture team, then you should have experience being an architect. And there are still, architect roles in Web3 because you've got, not just smart contracts, but you've usually got, a DApp where you've got different layers, and that system needs to be architected. So I think that a lot of the same principles apply, that if you're going to lead a team, that you should have done that role at least for some period of time. So I think that for me, those same types of skills still transfer to Web3 development. I mean, obviously, when I first started out being a Solidity developer, I was an experienced developer, but not experienced in Solidity. So I couldn't be a team lead of a Solidity development team at that time. I think that now at the company I'm at now, we don't really actually have a team lead because it's a small team. So, but after you get experience, then you could have a role at another company where you are the team. And that those kinds of concepts, I think, are the same, whether you're doing Web3, Web2, and Web1. Back when I started, I guess they would have called that. So I think, again, many of the same type of leadership roles exist.
Yeah, definitely. So with the structures changing as much, like as you mentioned in Web3, we are starting to have a lot of more of lean team structure. And given that and the industry trends that are booming, what would you advise for someone who's trying to kind of pivot their role and transition from a Web2 developer to a Web3 developer?
Well, I'll talk a little, mostly about Solidity because that's what I know. But there are also, I know that there are recruiters out there looking for Rust developers. So those are also opportunities for doing Rust development. But so I think that if you want to get into Solidity development, at least, then you really do need to learn the Solidity language, and also some of the development tools, for instance. And things are moving so fast that one of the main development tools that was used back when I was first learning, which is called Truffle, with Ganache, which is a local blockchain that can be run using the Truffle framework, that's been sunset. So just in the last, I started learning Solidity, one of the main developer environments isn't there anymore. But I recommend using Hardhat, which is a development environment for Solidity. I use VS Code as my IDE, and these aren't the only ones. These are the ones that I like and that I prefer. There are some other development environments that Solidity developers use, like Foundry and Scaffold ETH. But a lot of people do use Hardhat, so that would be a good place to start, in addition to learning the Solidity language itself. And I would encourage people, if they want to learn Solidity, again, because it's so different from other programming languages, try to find some kind of a boot camp that has mentors and or someone that's going to be able to review your code. Now, maybe with some of the AI technologies that are coming up, there'll be ways that boot camps could be created where you could actually have AI mentors that help people learn to do Solidity. But I think that because of the nature of smart contract development, that it is really good to try to find some kind of a course or a boot camp that actually has mentors and people looking at your code. There's Consensus Boot Camp. I haven't done that one, but I've heard that it's pretty good. There's another one called the Encode Club Boot Camps that I've heard good things about. And in fact, at my last employer, we actually hired someone who had finished that boot camp, and she was really good. Previously, one of the best ways to learn about Solidity development and other blockchain technologies was Ivan on Tech. Now that has changed now, and it's now called Morales Academy. I'm not sure if it's as good as it was when it was Ivan on Tech, but I think it's okay. Alchemy has something called Alchemy University, and I've had a look at some of their courses. Again, I haven't done them myself, but they look reasonable. And I think that most of these that I've just named all have some form of mentoring, so that you can actually be sure you're learning Solidity.
Yeah, I think that was some really helpful. And finally, what are some upcoming projects or initiatives that you're particularly excited about at MELD?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about MELD. First of all, MELD is an ecosystem, and you can find it at MELD, MELD.com. And we have an L1 blockchain of our own that is a subnet of Avalanche, and it is actually the subnet with the most validators. We have 30, I believe, right now. But as part of our ecosystem, it's not just our L1 blockchain, but we have a cross-chain wallet where you can view your assets on the MELD blockchain, on Avalanche, on Ethereum, and on Cardano. And in the future, we will probably be adding other networks. But we also have a staking protocol that is live, and we have a lending and borrowing protocol that is now in open beta on the testnet. And it's, again, for lending and borrowing. We've got an app will be coming out soon. And some interesting things that we've got going on that we're going to be adding into our lending and borrowing protocol are, again, I mentioned RWAs. We'll be working on integrating those into our lending and borrowing protocol. We're also going to be adding something that other lending and borrowing protocols don't have, which is boost to your yield, so that when you supply, for instance, you're not just getting the interest that you're earning from the borrowers, but you also get an external boost. And I can't talk a lot about that yet, but that's in the works. And we're going to be applying that boost not only to supplying, but also to the borrow side. And that boost will be for holders of MELD bank managers, which are NFTs. Again, this is a way that NFTs can be used to give special benefits to holders of those NFTs. So we'll be adding things like that to our lending and borrowing protocol. Again, we're in testnet with the lending and borrowing right now, and we'll be going to mainnet sometime in the next couple of months. And you can go to meld.fi if you want to get early access to our banking app, which will be coming out soon. So we've got a lot of interesting things that are going on at MELD.
Amazing. That sounds really exciting. We'll be following through to check the progress, definitely. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, or anything that you would like to recommend?
Well, I think that one thing I would like to talk about is we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think, again, it's important to say, because it's something that I was completely clueless about when I first started learning about blockchain, in that choice of programming language that you make could very well determine what types of companies you work for. For instance, you said you went Hyperledger Fabric, so I'm assuming you've worked more in the large enterprise and large organization in blockchain. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. And in fact, when I first learned about blockchain, I was working at a large organization doing integration, and I was thinking, oh, this could be interesting as an integration platform. So that is a use case for enterprises, large organizations that are using private or consortium blockchain. So if you go into Hyperledger Fabric, those are the kinds of companies you're going to be working for. If you learn Solidity, you're most likely going to be working for a startup. Now, there are some organizations that use, Ethereum, enterprise Ethereum for enterprise applications, but most likely, if you go into Solidity, you're going to be working for a startup company that is building either their own blockchain or they're building dApps and other applications on a public blockchain. It doesn't necessarily have to be Ethereum, because now there are a lot of compatible chains. Again, like our MELD blockchain is EVM compatible. There are a number of other EVM compatible chains like Polygon. So if you learn Solidity, that doesn't mean that you can only write smart contracts for Ethereum. You can write smart contracts that will run on any EVM compatible chain. But that means that you're going to be working for, most likely, small startups. And that means that even if you are an internal employee and not a contractor, you're not going to have the, let's say, you're still going to be like a contractor, and that it's not going to be the same as working for a large organization where there's some more, job security. So job security will be lower if you go into companies that focus on public blockchain and those types of applications, because they're startups, and sometimes money runs out, especially during, when the bear market started and all of a sudden, token values dropped. That means that the funds that those startups have and can get are lower, and your job security isn't going to be as high. So you need to be able to understand that that's what you're getting into. I didn't know that when I was starting with Solidity. I'm okay with it because, again, I was a contractor for about 14 years. I went into Solidity, so I already had that mindset. But for people who are used to working for an organization where they're an internal employee and they have a certain amount of job security, it won't be the same if you go into the Solidity development, most likely. And I think that's important for people to know because, like I said, I had no clue. I picked Solidity because it seemed pretty straightforward and it seemed like an interesting programming language. I had no idea that it was I was choosing a career path.
Definitely. Now that you tell all that, I can recall my experiences. And I primarily picked Hyperledger because I was a student and I had to make the most fun experimental research report. And I thought Hyperledger, because no one is picking it, it will be a cool project to do. And that's primarily why I started there. But eventually, because it was deprecated so often, I chose to pivot and I went into Solidity and Ethereum development. And that's where I saw a lot more experimentation happening, a lot more rapid. And the teams are a lot more chaotic. So for me, it's a lot more fun. So definitely when you say that you are defining your opportunities and the risk is a little higher, it's completely makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So I think that just, and there are opportunities in blockchains and large organizations like banks and governments and things like that. So that there's nothing wrong with going into that, but you just, again, need to know what you're getting into when you choose a certain language.
Definitely. So I think, that would be really helpful for people starting in, because now they have access to a lot more people in the space. They have access to a lot more resources. So yes.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't mention when you were talking, how can you get into the development in addition to doing boot camps and also learning how to use frameworks like Hard Hat, is also doing hackathons. One of my colleagues at my previous company that I worked for, he actually learned Solidity and other blockchain technologies by doing a series of hackathons. He spent a year doing hackathons, and that's how he learned.
I think that's the best way. You get to meet so many new people, you get to see so many ideas coming up, and sometimes you just encounter projects that you could have never thought of as well. So I think hackathon.
And I would do that in addition to doing some kind of a course, because again, I think it's really, really important, especially with Solidity, to learn how to code it properly. But if you want to really have a portfolio of things that you've done, hackathons are a good way to do that. And any course that you take should result in some kind of a portfolio in GitHub, even if they're just simple projects that seem silly to you. Just having those in GitHub to show this is what I learned, important.
I think, that's one very crucial advice. A lot of times I've seen developers refraining from posting on GitHub only because they think their project is not as meaningful?
Yeah, I mean, when I was first starting, like my GitHub was basically like the little projects I did for my course. I mean, now I've actually been contributing to some, bigger things, so I can point to those. But when I first started out, that's what I had. But the course was also designed so that I would have those projects to show, even if they're little silly ones like tic-tac-toe.
Yeah, that
Or
completely.
rock paper scissors. That was one of the ones I had to code.
Oh, that's a cute one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing these insights, Heather. It has been incredible learning about your journey, and I hope our listeners find some advice that they can use to upscale and get started onto their Web3 journey. For our listeners now, how can they get in touch with you? How can they contact you if needed?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So my name is Heather Swope. I'm currently employed by MELD, so you might find me under my name, or if you look at the MELD company page, I think it shows people who work there. So I think probably LinkedIn. I'm also a member of the Phoenix Guild, so I'm in the Phoenix Guild group on Telegram. So if you're a member of the Phoenix Guild group on Telegram, then you can @ me. You'll probably have to actually @ me because I'm in a lot of groups on Telegram, and sometimes I don't see things immediately. So if I don't respond to you immediately, it's because I haven't seen it. It's not because I'm ignoring you. But those are, I think, probably the two best ways to get in touch with me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Heather. It has been great. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me.